I hate my adopted parents. The envelope crinkled in my sweaty palm as I stared at the numbers on the tax document I'd stolen from Richard's home office. $47,000. That's how much my adoptive parents received in subsidies and tax breaks last year for the privilege of caring for me. I wanted to laugh, but my throat felt too tight. $47,000. Meanwhile, I've been wearing the same 3 pairs of jeans for 2 years because Margaret claims they can't afford new clothes for me. The same Margaret who dropped $800 on a purse last week without blinking. Riley. Her shrill voice cut through the silence of their pristine McMansion. The dishes won't wash themselves. I quickly shoved the papers back into the folder and slipped out of Richard's office, my socks silent against the marble floors they make me mop twice a week. The kitchen was already spotless from my morning cleaning, but lunch had generated the usual pile of expensive china and crystal glasses. God forbid the Ashfords load their own dishwasher. There you are, Margaret said without looking up from her phone. She was probably coordinating another charity gala where she played the saint for adopting a troubled teen. If only her socialite friends knew the truth. Mrs. Patterson from Social Services is coming by at 4. You know the drill. Unfortunately, I did. Smile. Nod. Tell Mrs. Patterson how grateful I am for this wonderful opportunity. Show her my room, really the converted basement storage area with a twin bed and no windows, but we'd pretend it was my choice because I prefer the quiet. Don't mention that the heat barely reaches down there in winter, or that they lock the kitchen at night so I can't raid their food. Of course, I said, loading their lunch plates. Imported cheese, organic everything, the kind of spread that probably cost more than most families spend on groceries in a week. My own lunch had been a peanut butter sandwich with the heel pieces of bread. Margaret finally glanced up, her eyes scanning me with that familiar look of distaste. And for heaven's sake, try to look presentable. Maybe brush your hair. My hair was fine. It just wasn't salon perfect like hers, blown out twice a week at a place that charged more than I'd see in allowance money all year. Not that I got an allowance. Oh, and Riley. She smiled that cold smile I'd learned to fear. Remember what happens if you get creative with your stories. Foster care has a long waiting list these days, and you're almost 18. Most families aren't interested in teenagers who are about to age out anyway. The threat hung in the air like it always did. Be grateful. Stay quiet. Don't bite the hand that feeds you scraps while feast themselves. But what Margaret didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that 3 weeks ago, I'd finally worked up the courage to call the number I'd found in my case file. The number for Dorothy Chen, my biological grandmother who'd been trying to reach me for 2 years. The grandmother the Ashfords claimed didn't exist. Turns out she'd been fighting for visitation rights this whole time. Turns out I had family who actually wanted me, not just my government funding. My 18th birthday was in 6 days. 6 more days of this performance, this fake gratitude, this prison disguised as privilege. 6 more days, and then I was going to burn their perfect little scam to the ground. Mrs. Patterson arrived at exactly 4:02 p.m., her sensible Honda Civic looking out of place in our circular driveway next to Richard's Tesla and Margaret's BMW. I watched from the living room window as she gathered her worn messenger bag and tablet, the same tired woman who'd been checking on me for 3 years now. She meant well, but she had a caseload of 47 kids and exactly 30 minutes to spend with each one during these quarterly visits. Showtime, Margaret murmured, suddenly appearing beside me with that practiced smile already plastered across her face. She'd changed into her casual mom outfit, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Mrs. Patterson's monthly car payment. The doorbell rang, and Margaret transformed completely. Riley, honey, could you get the door? I'm just finishing up these cookies for the school bake sale. Honey. She'd never called me honey in private. Not once. I opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson looking even more exhausted than usual. Dark circles under her eyes, coffee stain on her blazer, the general frazzled appearance of someone holding the system together with paperwork and sheer willpower. Hi, Mrs. Patterson. Come on in. Riley, good to see you. She stepped inside and immediately began scanning the house with professional eyes, checking off invisible boxes on her mental evaluation form. Clean house. Check. Well-dressed family. Check. No obvious signs of distress. Check. Dorothy. So wonderful to see you again, Margaret gushed, sweeping into the foyer like she was greeting a dear friend instead of a government employee. How are your boys? Still playing Little League? Small talk. Margaret had actually researched Mrs. Patterson's family to make these conversations feel personal. The manipulation was masterful. They're good, thank you for asking. Tommy made varsity this year. Mrs. Patterson smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving. Shall we sit down? I have a few routine questions, and then I'd love to hear how Riley's doing. We settled in the living room where Margaret had strategically placed fresh flowers and family photos that made us look like a loving household. There was even a picture of me at last year's forced family vacation to Martha's Vineyard, where I'd spent 5 days babysitting their friends' kids while they drank wine and pretended I was their beloved daughter. Riley's been doing wonderfully, Margaret began, launching into her rehearsed speech. Her grades are excellent, all A's and B's. She's really found her place here. Mrs. Patterson nodded, making notes. That's fantastic. Riley, how are you feeling about the college application process? I know senior year can be stressful. My stomach clenched. College applications. Another lie in the Ashford playbook. They'd been telling social services about all the college prep they were providing, but when I'd asked about SAT tutoring or application fees, Richard had laughed and suggested community college might be more realistic for someone with my background. It's going well, I said carefully. I'm looking at several options. What I didn't mention was that my grandmother Dorothy had already offered to help with application fees and had put me in touch with a college counselor who specialized in helping kids from difficult situations. Real help, not the fake support the Ashfords performed for social services. Any particular schools you're excited about? Mrs. Patterson asked. Before I could answer, Margaret jumped in. We've been looking at some lovely state schools. Nothing too far from home, of course. We'd miss her terribly. Miss her. Right. They'd missed their annual $47,000 check and their live-in housekeeper. But in exactly 5 days, when I turned 18, none of that would matter anymore. That's sweet, Mrs. Patterson said, completely buying the act. If only she knew what was hidden in Richard's filing cabinet. Mrs. Patterson asked to see my room, which always made my pulse spike. Margaret led us downstairs with that practiced maternal smile, chattering about how I specifically requested the basement space for privacy and quiet study time. The lies flowed so smoothly I almost believed them myself. My room was a windowless 10 by 12 space that used to be storage, with concrete walls painted a cheerful yellow that fooled no one. Margaret had strategically placed a small desk lamp and some motivational posters before the visit, props that would disappear again tomorrow. The twin bed barely fit, and my few belongings were crammed into a plastic dresser from Walmart, quite the contrast to the antique furniture filling the rest of the house. It's cozy, Mrs. Patterson said diplomatically, though I caught her frowning at the space heater in the corner. You're comfortable down here, Riley. Very, I lied, not mentioning that the ceiling leaked when it rained, or that I could hear every footstep upstairs through the thin floor. Back in the living room, Mrs. Patterson wrapped up her standard questions. Health good? Check. School attendance consistent? Check. Any concerns about the placement? Check, check, check. She was already packing up her tablet when her phone buzzed. Excuse me one moment, she said, glancing at the screen. Her expression shifted slightly. Actually, I need to ask you about something, Margaret. I just received an inquiry from a Dorothy Chin claiming to be Riley's biological grandmother. She says she's been trying to establish contact. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Margaret's smile faltered for just a second before snapping back into place, but I saw the flash of panic in her eyes. Richard straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. Oh, that poor woman, Margaret said, shaking her head sadly. We've dealt with this before. She's quite elderly and unfortunately suffering from some cognitive issues. She's convinced Riley is related to her, but there's simply no connection. Our lawyer had to send a cease and desist letter last year. My heart hammered against my ribs. The lies were so casual, so believable. If I hadn't already spoken to Dorothy myself, if I hadn't heard her voice break when she told me about the letters the Ashford's lawyer had sent threatening legal action if she continued trying to contact me, I might have believed it too. I see, Mrs. Patterson said, making a note. She seemed quite lucid when I spoke with her, but I understand these situations can be complicated. She mentioned having documentation proving the relationship. Family documents can be forged, Richard interjected smoothly. We've seen it before with Riley's case. Unfortunately, some people develop unhealthy attachments to children they believe they've lost. It's sad, really. Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically. Of course. I'll make a note in the file. Riley, you've never had any contact with this woman, correct? Every eye in the room fixed on me. Margaret's smile remained perfectly in place, but her manicured fingers gripped the arm of her chair. Richard leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes holding that familiar warning. This was it. I could tell the truth right now. Blow up their lies, expose the fake concern, the financial exploitation, everything. Mrs. Patterson would have to investigate. The Ashfords would face consequences. But I'd also lose my chance for a clean escape. 5 more days and I'd be free. Dorothy was expecting me next Thursday, the day after my birthday. We had plans, real plans, not the manipulation disguised as care I'd known for 3 years. No, I said quietly. I've never heard from her. The relief that flickered across Margaret's face was almost microscopic, but I caught it. Mrs. Patterson made one final note and stood up. Well, everything looks wonderful here as always. Riley, you're lucky to have such a caring family. Lucky. If she only knew about the $47,000 sitting in their bank account. After Mrs. Patterson left, the house fell into an uncomfortable silence. Margaret's fake smile vanished the moment the door clicked shut, replaced by her usual expression of cold irritation. Richard poured himself a scotch even though it was barely 5 o'clock, his tell that something had genuinely rattled him. That woman is becoming a problem, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. Dorothy Chin. We need to shut this down permanently. I thought your lawyer handled it, Margaret snapped, already pulling out her phone. You said the cease and desist would be enough. Apparently not. She's escalating, going directly to social services now. Richard's jaw tightened. We can't have some delusional old woman interfering this close to Riley aging out. They were talking about me like I wasn't even in the room, which was typical. But what chilled me was hearing Dorothy's name spoken with such venom. This woman who'd spent 2 years fighting to reach me, who'd cried on the phone when she heard my voice for the first time, who'd already started converting her spare bedroom for my arrival, they were calling her delusional. What do you want me to do about it? Margaret asked, her manicured fingers flying across her phone screen. Have Patterson file a restraining order. Harassment of a minor. Make it official. Richard drained half his scotch. The last thing we need is some bleeding heart social worker deciding to investigate her claims. My blood ran cold. A restraining order would kill any chance Dorothy had of seeing me before I aged out. Even worse, it might scare her into backing down entirely. What if she decided the legal battle wasn't worth it? What if I showed up next Thursday and found out she'd given up on me? Riley, Margaret's sharp voice cut through my panic. You're not to answer the door for anyone we don't know. And if that woman somehow contacts you directly, you tell us immediately. Understood. Understood, I managed, though my mouth felt full of sand. Too late. Dorothy had already contacted me. We'd been talking for 3 weeks now, careful phone calls when the Ashfords were out at their various social obligations. She'd told me about my biological father, her son Michael, who died when I was 2. She'd shown me pictures over FaceTime, family gatherings where I could see his eyes in my own face, holiday traditions I'd never known existed, a whole history the Ashfords had stolen from me. But now they were going to try to silence her legally. Make it impossible for her to fight for me anymore. The timing couldn't be worse, Richard muttered, checking his own phone. The Hendersons are considering adoption through our agency recommendation. That's another $45,000 annually if we can facilitate the connection properly. My stomach lurched. They weren't just exploiting me, they were building a business model around it. Finding other wealthy couples who wanted the tax breaks and subsidies without the genuine commitment. Creating a whole network of fake families motivated by profit instead of love. Don't worry about the Hendersons, Margaret said coldly. I'll handle Dorothy Chin. A few phone calls to the right people, and she'll realize that harassing a stable adoptive family has consequences. The casual cruelty in her voice made my hands shake. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were actively trying to destroy an elderly woman whose only crime was loving her granddaughter. For more days until my birthday. For more days of pretending I didn't know what they really were. For more days before I could grab those financial documents, walk out their door forever, and expose every single lie they built their comfortable life on. But first, I had to warn Dorothy about what was coming. Tonight, when they inevitably left for Richard's firm's monthly dinner party, I'd find a way to call her. They weren't going to steal my family twice. That evening, I watched from my basement window as Richard's BMW pulled out of the driveway at exactly 7:15 p.m. They'd be gone for at least 3 hours. These firm dinners always turned into networking marathons where Margaret could show off her charitable work with foster children. Tonight, that performance might actually save me. I waited another 10 minutes to be safe, then crept upstairs to use the landline in the kitchen. My hands shook as I dialed Dorothy's number, praying she'd answer. Hello. Dorothy, it's Riley. I don't have much time, but you need to know, they're planning to get a restraining order against you. They want to claim you're harassing me. The sharp intake of breath on the other end made my chest tight. Oh, honey. I was afraid something like this might happen when I called social services. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. But we need to change our plan. Can I come earlier? Like tomorrow night instead of waiting until after my birthday? Silence stretched between us, and for a terrifying moment I thought the call had dropped. Then Dorothy's voice came back, stronger this time. What if we don't wait at all? What if I came to get you right now? My heart hammered. Tonight? I've been thinking about this since you called last week. You're 17, Riley. Old enough to petition for emancipation, old enough to choose where you want to live. And I have every legal document proving you're my granddaughter, birth certificates, DNA tests I had done 2 years ago, everything. The DNA tests. I'd forgotten she mentioned those. Hard evidence that would destroy the Ashfords' lies about her being delusional. But what about social services? Won't I get in trouble for leaving? Let me worry about that. I've already contacted a lawyer who specializes in family reunification cases. If you want to leave tonight, we can make this legal and official by morning. Through the kitchen window, I could see the neighbor's house lit up for their own evening routines. Normal families doing normal things, not calculating the financial benefits of their children or threatening elderly women with legal action. For the first time in 3 years, that kind of normal felt within reach. There's something else, I said, glancing toward Richard's office. I found documents. Financial records showing exactly how much money they've been getting from me. $47,000 last year alone. And they're planning to help other families do the same thing. Bring everything you can, Dorothy said immediately. My lawyer will know what to do with it. I could hear papers rustling on her end, the sound of someone preparing for action instead of just talking about it. Can you be ready in 2 hours? She asked. I know it's fast, but... Yes. The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. Yes, I can be ready. After we hung up, I stood in the Ashford's pristine kitchen surrounded by granite countertops and stainless steel appliances I'd cleaned 1,000 times, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with absolute terror. In 2 hours, Dorothy would be here. In 2 hours, I'd walk away from the tax documents, the emotional manipulation, the fake family photos and carefully rehearsed lies. But I'd also be burning every bridge, making an enemy of people who'd already shown they'd destroy anyone who threatened their comfortable scam. I headed toward Richard's office to gather evidence, my socks silent against the marble floors I'd never have to mop again. 2 hours until I discovered whether having real family was worth the war that was about to begin. I was halfway to Richard's office when I heard the garage door rumbling open. My blood turned to ice. They weren't supposed to be back for hours. The firm dinner had just started, why were they home? Car doors slammed in the garage, followed by the sharp click of Margaret's heels on the concrete floor. I could hear Richard's voice, muffled but agitated. They were arguing about something. I sprinted back to the kitchen, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The landline, I had to hang it up properly, make sure there was no evidence of my call. My sweaty fingers fumbled with the receiver just as the door from the garage burst open. Told you we should have handled this months ago, Margaret was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. Now we've got social services asking questions and that Chin woman escalating. Richard appeared behind her, loosening his tie with jerky, angry movements. The dinner was a waste anyway. Half the partners spent the whole time talking about the new IRS regulations on adoption credits. Apparently there's going to be increased scrutiny on subsidies starting next quarter. My stomach plummeted. Increased scrutiny meant investigations, audits, the exact kind of attention the Ashfords couldn't afford. No wonder they'd left early. Riley. Margaret's eyes fixed on me with laser focus. What are you doing up here? Just getting some water, I managed, grabbing a glass from the cabinet with hands that definitely weren't shaking. Definitely not. The kitchen is off limits after 7, she said coldly. You know that. I did know that. The arbitrary rule about when I could access food was just another way to control me. But tonight I'd been so focused on calling Dorothy that I'd forgotten their stupid restrictions. Sorry. I was thirsty, Anne. No excuses. Richard's voice cut through my explanation. Rules exist for a reason. He moved toward his office, and panic shot through me like electricity. What if he noticed something was out of place? What if I'd left a filing cabinet drawer slightly open, or forgotten to put a folder back exactly where I'd found it? Actually, Margaret said, her tone shifting to something even more dangerous, I think we need to discuss something with you, Riley. She gestured toward the living room, the same space where we performed our happy family charade for Mrs. Patterson just hours ago. Now it felt like a courtroom where I was about to be sentenced. Sit, Richard ordered, pouring himself another scotch. His second in 3 hours. I perched on the edge of the white leather sofa, the same one I wasn't usually allowed to use because I might damage the fabric. Everything in this house was about appearances, about maintaining the illusion of wealth and sophistication while treating me like I was contaminated. We've been thinking about Dorothy Chen, Margaret began, settling into her chair with predatory grace. About her claims regarding you. My mouth went dry. Okay. The thing is, even if there was some distant biological connection, which there isn't, it doesn't matter. You're our legal responsibility until you turn 18. Our legal property, essentially. Property. The word hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd suspected that's how they saw me for months. But more importantly, Richard continued, swirling his scotch, we've invested considerable time and resources in you, Riley. Private school tuition, housing, food, healthcare. That investment needs to be protected. I stared at him, processing the implications. Private school tuition that was covered by the adoption subsidies. Housing in a basement room with no windows. Food that consisted of whatever scraps they couldn't be bothered to finish. What are you saying? We're saying that if Dorothy Chen continues her harassment, or if anyone tries to interfere with our family arrangement, there will be consequences. Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. For everyone involved. The threat hung in the air between us, crystal clear despite the careful language. They weren't just planning to get a restraining order against Dorothy. They were planning to destroy her if she didn't back down. But here's what's interesting, Richard said, checking his phone. Dorothy Chen called our house tonight at 8:47 p.m. The call lasted 12 minutes. My vision tunneled. They had caller ID on the landline. Of course they did. Of course they monitored everything. Funny thing is, Margaret added, her voice deadly quiet, we were at dinner. So someone else must have answered our phone. Someone who was explicitly told never to contact that woman. They knew. They knew everything. In exactly 93 minutes, Dorothy would pull into their driveway expecting to rescue me. Instead, she'd be walking into a trap. Richard's phone buzzed in his hand, and his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Perfect timing, he said, answering on the second ring. James. Yes, we need that restraining order filed tonight. Emergency motion. I watched in horror as he paced toward the window, speaking in low tones to what had to be his lawyer. Margaret kept her eyes fixed on me, studying my face like she was cataloging every micro-expression of fear. Dorothy Chen has escalated to direct contact with the minor, Richard continued into the phone. Telephonic harassment at 8:47 p.m. tonight. Yes, we have phone records. No, she's clearly unstable. Could be dangerous. Dangerous. Dorothy, who'd cried when she told me about the birthday card she'd been sending to my old foster placements for 3 years, hoping they'd eventually reach me. Dorothy, who'd already bought a car seat for her ancient Honda because she remembered I'd never learned to drive and wanted to teach me safely. The order needs to include a 500-yard perimeter, Richard was saying. And we want criminal charges if she violates it. 500 yards. That would cover their entire street. If Dorothy showed up in 90 minutes like we'd planned, she'd be arrested the moment she turned onto Maple Ridge Drive. Riley. Margaret's voice snapped my attention back to her. I can see those little wheels turning in your head. So let me be very clear about what happens next. She stood up and walked to Richard's briefcase, pulling out a manila folder I recognized with a sick jolt. My case file. The one that was supposed to be confidential, locked away in social services. You're going to call Dorothy Chen back, Margaret said, opening the folder to reveal documents I'd never seen before. You're going to tell her that you've reconsidered. That you're happy here and don't want contact with her. And if I don't? Then Dorothy learned some very interesting things about her dead son. Margaret pulled out a police report, holding it just far enough away that I could see the letterhead but not the details. Did you know Michael Chen was arrested for drug possession 3 months before you were born? Did you know there's a warrant for unpaid child support in Nevada? My heart stopped. Michael, my father, who Dorothy had described as a gentle art teacher who died in a car accident. The father I'd been building an image of in my mind for 3 weeks, constructing a history that made sense of who I was. That's not true, I whispered. Court records don't lie, sweetheart. Margaret's smile was vicious. Michael Chen was a deadbeat drug addict who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend and overdosed in a motel room in Reno. Dorothy's been lying to you. The words hit me like physical blows. Everything Dorothy had told me, the family history she'd shared, the pride in her voice when she talked about my father, was it all fiction? She's a delusional old woman clinging to fantasies, Richard added, snapping his phone shut. The restraining order will be active within the hour. James is filing it electronically tonight. I stared at the police report in Margaret's hands, trying to process what they were telling me. Either Dorothy had been lying about everything, or the Ashfords had somehow fabricated documents to destroy my only chance at real family. The choice is yours, Riley, Margaret said, settling back into her chair. Make the call and spare Dorothy the embarrassment of criminal charges. Or let her show up here and discover exactly what kind of man her precious son really was. The local news would love that story, elderly woman arrested for stalking, family secrets exposed. 87 minutes until Dorothy arrived. 87 minutes to figure out if the police report in Margaret's hands was real, or just another layer of manipulation in a 3-year campaign of lies. But one thing was certain, whatever I decided in the next few minutes would determine whether I spent my 18th birthday free or trapped in their web forever. The police report trembled in Margaret's manicured fingers, and I caught sight of something that made my pulse spike. The letterhead was wrong. I'd seen enough official documents during my time in foster care to recognize the format, and this one was off. The font was slightly different, the spacing too wide, like someone had recreated it on their home printer. You're lying, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Excuse me. That's not a real police report. The formatting is wrong, and the paper's too white. Real court documents yellow with age, and this one claims to be from 15 years ago. Richard paused mid-conversation with his lawyer, his eyes snapping to Margaret with something that looked like annoyance. For just a second, their perfect coordination faltered. Don't be ridiculous, Margaret said, but she tucked the folder against her chest, hiding the documents from view. You're upset and not thinking clearly. Let me see it then. If it's real, let me read the whole thing. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Through the living room windows, I could see the Hendersons' house across the street, warm light spilling from their kitchen windows. A normal Tuesday night for a normal family, while my entire future hung in the balance. James, I'll call you back, Richard said abruptly, ending his call. We have a situation here. He moved toward me with the predatory grace of someone used to intimidating people into submission. In his expensive suit and Italian leather shoes, he looked like exactly what he was, a lawyer who'd built his career on manipulation and finding loopholes in systems designed to protect vulnerable people. Riley, I think you're forgetting something important here, he said, his voice dropping to the tone he probably used in courtrooms. Even if Dorothy Chen is your biological grandmother, which remains unproven, you're still a minor in our legal custody. That means we decide what's best for you. For 3 more days, I shot back. I'm 18 on Friday. 3 days is plenty of time, Margaret added, finally setting the fake police report aside. Plenty of time for Dorothy to be arrested for violating a restraining order. Plenty of time for criminal charges to be filed. Do you really think a 72-year-old woman wants to spend her golden years dealing with legal battles? The cruelty was breathtaking. They weren't just trying to keep me trapped, they were planning to destroy an innocent woman whose only crime was trying to connect with her granddaughter. But they'd made one crucial mistake. In their arrogance, they'd revealed the fake police report too early, let their desperation show through the cracks in their usual polished performance. If they were willing to fabricate documents about my father, what else had they lied about? I need to use the bathroom, I said, standing up abruptly. Sit down, Richard commanded. We're not finished here. What are you going to do, physically restrain me? I'm sure Mrs. Patterson would love to hear about that in her next report. The mention of the social worker made both of them pause. Their entire scam depended on maintaining the illusion of being model adoptive parents. Any hint of physical control or abuse would trigger investigations they couldn't afford. 5 minutes, Margaret said through gritted teeth. Then you're making that phone call. I headed toward the hall bathroom, my mind racing. 73 minutes until Dorothy arrived. I had to find a way to warn her without access to the landline they were monitoring. My bedroom had no phone, no computer, no way to communicate with the outside world. But the house had a landline extension in Richard's office. The same office where I'd found the financial documents that proved their fraud. The same office they'd left unlocked because they were too busy threatening me to worry about securing their secrets. As I passed the office door, I could hear them arguing in hushed voices in the living room, probably debating whether the fake police report had been a tactical error. This might be my only chance. I slipped inside Richard's office and quietly closed the door, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it down the hall. The phone sat on his mahogany desk next to framed photos of charity events where he and Margaret posed with other people's children for tax purposes. I dialed Dorothy's number with shaking fingers, praying she'd answer on the first ring. Hello. Dorothy, don't come tonight, I whispered urgently. They know about our call. They're getting a restraining order, and they're planning to have you arrested if you show up. Oh honey, I'm already in the car. I'm about 20 minutes away. My blood turned to ice. Turn around. Please. They'll call the police the second they see you. Riley, listen to me. I brought my lawyer, and we have documentation that proves everything. Your birth certificate, the DNA test results, even correspondence from social services acknowledging my relationship to you. They can't. The office door burst open behind me. Richard stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. Hang up. Now. 68 minutes until my grandmother drove into a trap that would destroy both our chances at being a real family. I have to go, I whispered into the phone, but Dorothy's voice cut through before I could hang up. Riley, whatever they're telling you about your father, it's not true. I have his college transcripts, his teaching certificates, photos from his classroom. He was a good man. Richard lunged for the phone, but I clutched it tighter, pressing it against my ear. 20 minutes, you said. Don't come, I pleaded, even as Richard's fingers closed around my wrist. Please, just. He yanked the phone away and slammed it down, the plastic clattering against his desk. Stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Through the office window, I could see headlights turning onto our street. Too early to be Dorothy, but the sight made my chest seize with panic anyway. 66 minutes until she drove straight into their trap. Margaret. Richard bellowed. Call James back. We need that restraining order active immediately, not in an hour. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with fury. How long until the old woman gets here? 20 minutes when she called. So 17 now, maybe less. Richard was already dialing his lawyer back, his movements sharp and aggressive. James. The situation has escalated. We need police standing by. I watched in horror as he paced behind his desk, coordinating Dorothy's destruction like it was just another legal maneuver. Margaret stepped into the office and began rifling through filing cabinets, pulling out more documents I'd never seen. What about the Henderson recommendation? She asked, spreading papers across Richard's desk. If this blows up, if there's any investigation into our arrangement, we lose that referral. The Hendersons will never know, Richard said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. One crazy old woman making false claims doesn't affect our standing with the agency. False claims. I stared at the documents Margaret was organizing and realized they weren't just financial records. There were communication logs, emails with social services, correspondence with other adoptive families. This wasn't just about exploiting me, they were running an entire operation. How many? I asked, my voice barely audible. How many what? Margaret snapped, not looking up from her papers. How many kids? How many families are you doing this to? Richard ended his call and fixed me with that cold lawyer stare. That's none of your concern. But Margaret's satisfied smile told me everything. 7 placements currently. The Morrison family just finalized their adoption last month, a sibling pair, so that's double the subsidies. And the Hendersons will make 8 once we facilitate their match. 7 families. 7 kids who thought they'd found permanent homes but were really just income streams. 7 children being treated like investments while their parents collected checks and tax breaks. The police will be in position in 10 minutes, Richard announced. 2 patrol cars, 1 at each end of the street. The moment Dorothy Chen's vehicle enters the neighborhood, she'll be arrested for violation of a restraining order. What about Riley? Margaret asked. She's clearly been planning this escape for weeks. We can't trust her to keep quiet anymore. They talked about me like I wasn't standing right there, like I was just another problem to be managed and contained. Through the window, I watched more headlights sweep across the street, and my heart jumped before I realized it was just the neighbors coming home from dinner. 13 minutes until Dorothy arrived. 13 minutes to figure out how to save the only real family I'd ever had. Residential treatment, Richard said suddenly, his eyes lighting up with the kind of inspiration that made my blood freeze. Troubled teen facility. We tell social services that Riley's been having behavioral issues, making false accusations, showing signs of attachment disorder. Brilliant, Margaret breathed. That buys us 4 months until she ages out, and the state pays for residential placement. We keep the subsidies without the headache. 4 months in a lockdown facility for troubled teens. 4 months of being medicated into compliance while they collected money for housing me somewhere else. 4 months of missing my chance with Dorothy forever. But as I stared at the scattered documents on Richard's desk, I realized they'd made another crucial mistake in their panic. Financial records, communication logs, evidence of their entire fraudulent operation, it was all spread out right in front of me. And Margaret had left her phone on the desk, screen still lit up, while she organized their paperwork. 10 minutes until the police arrived. 12 minutes until Dorothy drove into their trap. Time to find out if I was brave enough to save us both. I grabbed Margaret's phone while she was bent over the filing cabinet, my fingers flying across the screen to find her recent calls. There it was, James Morrison, attorney, called 6 times in the last hour. I hit redial and prayed he'd think it was Margaret calling back. Margaret, what now? James's exasperated voice came through the speaker. James, this is Riley Chen, I said quickly, before he could hang up. I need you to know that Richard and Margaret Ashford have been committing adoption subsidy fraud for years. They're exploiting 8 families and 7 children for financial gain, and right now they're trying to frame my grandmother for harassment. Who is this? Margaret, what's going on? Richard spun around, his face contorting with rage when he saw me holding the phone. He lunged across the desk, scattering papers everywhere, but I dodged toward the window. Check the financial records, I said rapidly into the phone. $47,000 in subsidies last year alone while they keep me in a basement and make me work as their housekeeper. They're planning to put me in residential treatment to keep collecting money while. Richard's hand closed around my wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. Hang up that phone right now. But it was too late. Through the speaker, I could hear James Morrison's sharp intake of breath. Margaret? Margaret, are you there? What is this girl talking about? It's nothing, Margaret said, grabbing the phone from me. Just a troubled teenager having an episode. We've discussed this before, she makes wild accusations when she's upset. Financial records, James, I called out before Richard could clamp his hand over my mouth. Ask them about the Morrison family placement fees. Ask them how much they made for facilitating your adoption. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then James Morrison's voice came back, colder than winter. Richard? I think we need to have a conversation. James, let me explain, Richard started, but the lawyer had already hung up. Margaret's phone immediately started buzzing with incoming calls. James Morrison. Then another number I didn't recognize. Then another. Word was spreading fast through whatever network they'd built their scam on. You little bitch, Margaret hissed, her composure finally cracking completely. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Saved 7 kids from being treated like ATM machines, I shot back, adrenaline making me braver than I'd ever been. Richard's phone rang. Then the house landline. Then Margaret's phone again. The sound was overwhelming, like alarm bells announcing the collapse of their carefully constructed fraud. Through the chaos, I heard something that made my heart soar, a car door slamming in the driveway. Dorothy. She was early. The police, Margaret said frantically, checking her watch. They should be here by now. Where are the patrol cars? Richard was staring at his phone in disbelief. James canceled the restraining order request. He's not taking my calls. The doorbell rang, echoing through the house like a gunshot. Then Dorothy's voice, strong and clear, Riley. It's Grandma. I'm here. Grandma. She'd never called herself that before, but hearing it made something inside my chest break open with relief. Real family didn't need formal titles or legal documentation. Real family just showed up. Don't answer it, Richard commanded, but his authority was crumbling as fast as his phone kept ringing with angry calls from other lawyers. Margaret looked like she was about to have a breakdown, her perfect hair disheveled and her designer makeup smudged. This is a disaster. If the agency investigates, if they audit our placements. We're ruined, Richard finished, slumping into his desk chair. The doorbell rang again, followed by a firm knock. Dorothy wasn't going anywhere. 9 days until my 18th birthday had just become 9 seconds until my real life could finally begin. The doorbell rang a 3rd time, and I could hear Dorothy's voice getting stronger, more insistent. Riley, honey, I know you're in there. Mrs. Patterson called me. She said there might be some confusion about the restraining order, but my lawyer confirmed it was never actually filed. My heart leaped. Mrs. Patterson had called her. That meant social services was already involved, already asking questions about why a restraining order had been requested and then suddenly withdrawn. Richard's face went ashen. Patterson called her. How did she? Because James Morrison called Patterson, I realized, the pieces clicking together. When I told him about the fraud, he probably called social services directly. He doesn't want to be implicated in whatever you've been doing. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face crumpled. The Hendersons just canceled their application. They want nothing to do with us. $45,000, Richard muttered, staring at his desk like he was watching his entire empire collapse. Gone. Through the window, I could see Dorothy on the front porch, and she wasn't alone. A woman in a business suit stood beside her, probably the lawyer she'd mentioned. They looked calm, professional, like people who'd come prepared for a battle but hoping for a peaceful resolution. Answer the door, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. It's over, and you know it. Nothing's over, Margaret snapped, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Her phone kept buzzing, more calls, more cancellations, more people distancing themselves from whatever legal nightmare they'd created. Richard stood up slowly, straightening his tie like he was preparing for a court appearance. If we handle this right, we can minimize the damage. Claim we were misunderstood, that the financial arrangements were all legitimate. With what evidence? I gestured to the papers scattered across his desk. You've got records of 8 different families, payment schedules, and communication logs about facilitating matches for fees. Plus whatever James Morrison decides to tell investigators about how you've been operating. The doorbell rang again, followed by a woman's voice I didn't recognize. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, this is attorney Rebecca Walsh representing Dorothy Chen. We'd appreciate a few minutes of your time to discuss Riley's situation. An attorney. Dorothy had brought an actual attorney to a custody dispute with people who'd been lying to social services for 3 years. The contrast was stark. She was fighting legally and ethically for her granddaughter, while they built their relationship with me on fraud and manipulation. What do you want to do? Margaret asked Richard, her voice small and defeated. Before he could answer, my phone buzzed. Except I didn't have a phone, they'd never allowed me to have one. The buzzing was coming from Richard's desk drawer. That's my old phone, I said, confused. The one from my previous placement. I thought it was broken. Richard's face went even paler. We kept it. In case we needed to monitor any contacts you might have had. I pulled open the desk drawer and found my old phone. The screen lit up with dozens of missed messages and notifications. Messages from Dorothy that had been piling up for months. Birthday wishes, photos of family gatherings, updates about her life, plans for when we could finally meet. All the communication the Ashfords had been hiding from me while claiming she'd never tried to make contact. You've been intercepting her messages for months, I said, scrolling through message after message of love and hope from a grandmother I'd been told didn't exist. All those times you said no one cared about me, that I should be grateful for this placement, she was trying to reach me the entire time. Margaret made a sound like a trapped animal. Through the window, I could see Dorothy checking her own phone, probably wondering why we weren't answering the door. Riley, Richard said desperately, you have to understand our position. We've invested so much in you, provided you with opportunities. You've made $47,000 off me in 1 year while treating me like hired help. I cut him off. The only opportunity you've provided is the chance to be your unpaid servant. Dorothy's voice came through the door again, gentler now. Riley, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need, but I want you to know that you have a choice. You've always had a choice. A choice. For 3 years, the Ashfords had convinced me I had no options, no alternatives, nowhere to go. They'd isolated me from my history, intercepted communications from my real family, and built their financial security on my desperation for belonging. But now I had evidence of their fraud, legal representation waiting on their doorstep, and a grandmother who'd spent 2 years fighting through their lies to reach me. The choice was obvious. I walked to the front door with Richard's desperate protests echoing behind me. Through the decorative glass panels, I could see Dorothy's silhouette, smaller than I'd imagined, but standing straight and determined. The woman beside her held a leather briefcase and had the confident posture of someone who'd won difficult cases before. Riley, stop, Margaret called, but her voice lacked any real authority now. If you walk out that door, there's no coming back. No college fund, no family connections, no references for jobs. I turned to face her, my hand already on the doorknob. What college fund? You told me community college was more realistic for someone with my background. And what family connections? You mean the fake family photos and the charity galas where you parade me around for tax purposes? Richard appeared in the hallway, his face flushed and desperate. Think about this rationally. You're 17 years old with no work experience, no savings, no practical skills for independent living. What can that woman really offer you? Through the door, I heard Dorothy's voice again, patient but unwavering. I'm not leaving, sweetheart. We have all night if that's what you need. All night. While the Ashfords had always operated on ultimatums and threats, Dorothy was offering time and choice. The contrast was everything. She's offering something you never did, I said to Richard. Unconditional love. I opened the door. Dorothy was exactly as beautiful as she'd appeared over FaceTime, but seeing her in person made everything real in a way that digital calls couldn't. She had my father's dark eyes, my eyes, and when she smiled, I saw my own face reflected back through generations of shared genetics. Hi, baby, she said softly, and I started crying before I could stop myself. Ms. Chen, the attorney beside her said, extending her hand, I'm Rebecca Walsh. We spoke on the phone about your situation. Behind me, I could hear Margaret and Richard whispering frantically, probably debating whether to call security or try one last manipulation tactic. But their whispers felt distant and unimportant now. Dorothy brought something you need to see, Rebecca continued, pulling a manila folder from her briefcase. Documentation that proves the Ashfords have been intercepting court-mandated communication between you and your biological family for over 2 years. Court-mandated. What does that mean? Dorothy's eyes hardened as she looked past me toward the Ashfords. It means I've had legal visitation rights this entire time. The court ordered them to facilitate our contact when your adoption was finalized, but they've been claiming I was incompetent and refusing to comply. My blood turned to ice. Not only had they been stealing money meant for my care, they'd been violating direct court orders to keep me isolated from my real family. That's a federal crime, Rebecca added quietly. Interference with a court-mandated family reunification plan. The penalties include prosecution for custodial interference and immediate termination of adoption subsidies. Richard stepped forward, trying to reclaim control of the situation. Now wait just a minute. We've provided excellent care for Riley, and any communication issues were simply $47,000 in subsidies while housing her in a basement, Rebecca interrupted, consulting her notes. plus documented evidence of requiring unpaid domestic labor. And according to these text messages, she held up my old phone, systematic interception of legally protected family communication. Margaret made a strangled noise. How did you get that phone? Riley texted me 20 minutes ago, Dorothy said calmly. From this number that I've been messaging for months without response. Interesting how she suddenly gained access to it tonight, don't you think? They'd been caught in their own web of lies, and now it was collapsing around them in real time. Richard's phone buzzed again, probably another angry call from one of their co-conspirator families demanding answers. So here's what happens next, Rebecca continued, her voice taking on the crisp authority of someone delivering legal consequences. Riley is coming with us tonight. Given the evidence of fraud and court order violations, we'll be filing for emergency custody transfer pending her 18th birthday in 6 days. You can't just take her, Margaret protested weakly. Dorothy stepped closer to me, her presence warm and solid and real. I'm not taking anyone. I'm giving my granddaughter the choice she should have had years ago. The choice. Stand in this doorway forever, caught between a fraudulent family that had profited from my desperation and a grandmother who'd fought through 2 years of legal obstacles just to hold me. Really, it wasn't a choice at all. I grabbed the overnight bag I'd hidden under my basement bed 3 hours earlier, my hands shaking as I threw in the few belongings that actually mattered to me. The photo of my biological father that Dorothy had texted me weeks ago. The acceptance letter from State University that I'd been hiding from the Ashfords since it arrived. The notebook where I'd been documenting their financial fraud for months. Riley, you're making a mistake, Margaret called from the top of the basement stairs. That woman has filled your head with fantasies. She can't provide for you the way we can. I almost laughed. Provide for me? They'd spent $127 on me last year according to their meticulously kept receipts, while collecting $47,000 in subsidies. Even their fake concern couldn't hide the desperation in Margaret's voice as she watched her tax break walking out the door. Dorothy was waiting in the living room when I came upstairs, her lawyer Rebecca reviewing documents on the coffee table. Through the window, I could see Richard pacing in the driveway, his phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling every contact he had, trying to find someone who could stop this from happening. The emergency custody transfer will take effect immediately, Rebecca was explaining to Dorothy. Given Riley's age and the documented violations, the court will likely approve permanent guardianship within 48 hours. What about school? I asked, suddenly realizing I was walking away from my senior year with 6 months left. My transcripts, my college applications. Already handled, Dorothy smiled, pulling out a tablet. I contacted Lincoln High this afternoon. They're willing to accept you as a transfer student, and your guidance counselor there specializes in helping kids from difficult backgrounds navigate college admissions. She'd thought of everything. While the Ashfords had been planning to ship me off to residential treatment, Dorothy had been researching schools, talking to counselors, building an actual future for me instead of just managing me like a financial asset. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup smudged. Riley, please. Just think about this logically. You don't even know this woman. We've been your family for 3 years. You've been my captors for 3 years, I corrected, shouldering my bag. There's a difference. Rebecca's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen with satisfaction. That was James Morrison. Apparently Richard's been calling him non-stop, but James has already filed a complaint with the state adoption board. He wants to cooperate fully with any investigation to avoid being charged as an accessory. The domino effect was beautiful to watch. Every family in their network was probably getting calls tonight, every lawyer was distancing themselves, every carefully constructed lie was unraveling in real time. The Hendersons weren't the only ones who canceled, Dorothy added quietly. Rebecca spoke with 3 other families this evening. They're horrified to learn what this arrangement actually was. Richard burst through the front door, his face flushed and his expensive suit disheveled. Dorothy, we can work this out. There's no need to involve the authorities. Riley can visit you on weekends, holidays. Like you worked it out for the past 2 years when I had court-ordered visitation rights. Dorothy's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. Like you worked it out when you hired a lawyer to send me cease and desist letters for trying to contact my own granddaughter. I'd never heard anyone speak to Richard that way. In this house, his word had always been law, backed by threats and financial control. But Dorothy wasn't afraid of him, wasn't impressed by his lawyer credentials or his expensive furniture. She was just a grandmother who wanted her family back. Time to go, sweetheart, she said, offering me her arm. I was halfway to the door when Richard's phone rang with a tone I'd never heard before, sharp, urgent, like an emergency alert. He glanced at the screen and went completely white. It's Patterson, he said to Margaret, his voice barely audible. Social services. My stomach clenched. Mrs. Patterson calling at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday meant this had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Dorothy squeezed my shoulder reassuringly, but I could see the tension in Rebecca's face as Richard answered. Mrs. Patterson, this really isn't a good time, Richard's voice cracked as he listened to whatever she was saying. What do you mean emergency investigation? We haven't. No, there's been a misunderstanding. Rebecca stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. Emergency investigations happen when there's credible evidence of fraud or endangerment. Someone with serious authority made a call tonight. Through Richard's phone speaker, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's tired but determined voice. Mr. Ashford, I need you to understand that we've received documentation suggesting systematic violations of Riley's case management protocols. I'm required to conduct an immediate welfare check. Margaret sank into her white leather chair, finally understanding that their carefully maintained facade was crumbling in real time. How long do we have? She whispered to Richard. Patterson's en route now, he said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. With a police escort. They'll be here in 15 minutes. 15 minutes before Mrs. Patterson saw the basement room they'd been passing off as my choice. 15 minutes before she realized the educational opportunities and emotional support they'd been documenting for 3 years existed only on paper. We need to leave, Dorothy said firmly, checking her watch. Riley shouldn't be here when social services arrives. It'll just complicate the custody transfer. But I found myself hesitating, staring at Richard's office where months of evidence sat scattered across his mahogany desk. Financial records, communication logs, documentation of their entire fraudulent network, everything Mrs. Patterson would need to build a case against them. Wait, I said, pulling away from Dorothy's gentle guidance. There's something else she needs to see. I walked back into Richard's office, ignoring his strangled protests, and gathered the papers Margaret had spread across his desk during their panic. Bank statements showing subsidy deposits. Email chains discussing placement fees with other adoptive families. Spreadsheets tracking the financial value of different types of foster children. Riley, what are you doing? Dorothy asked, following me into the office. Making sure they can't do this to anyone else, I said, stuffing the documents into my backpack alongside my few belongings. Mrs. Patterson needs to see exactly how they've been operating. Rebecca's eyes lit up as she saw what I was collecting. Financial records, communication logs, this is everything we'd need for criminal charges. You can't take those, Richard said desperately, moving to block my path. Those are private business documents, protected by attorney-client privilege. Attorney-client privilege doesn't protect evidence of fraud, Rebecca shot back. Especially when that fraud involves government subsidies and endangered minors. Margaret's phone buzzed with another text, and she glanced at it with growing horror. The Petersons just called off their placement. That's 3 families tonight. The Petersons. I remembered seeing that name in Richard's email chains, a wealthy couple from the next town over who'd been considering adoption through the Ashfords' recommendation. Another family who'd realized they didn't want to be part of whatever legal nightmare was unfolding. How many families are going to lose their kids because of this? I asked, the weight of it suddenly hitting me. How many other kids are living in basements, being treated like servants, thinking this is what family looks like? Richard's face crumpled as his phone rang again. 7 active placements, he admitted. Maybe 8 if the Morrison placement goes through next month. 7 kids. 7 children who were about to watch their fake families implode when this investigation went public. 7 kids who would either find real families or age out of the system entirely, but at least they'd be free from this particular brand of exploitation. Dorothy checked her own phone, frowning. Rebecca Patterson just texted me directly. She's 3 minutes out, and she specifically wants to speak with Riley before we leave. 3 minutes to decide whether to face the social worker who'd been unknowingly enabling my exploitation for 3 years, or disappear into the night with my real family and let the system sort out the aftermath. Through the window, I could see headlights turning onto Maple Ridge Drive. Mrs. Patterson, arriving to discover that the model placement she'd been documenting was actually an elaborate financial fraud. She deserves to know the truth, I said, making my decision. She's been lied to just as much as I have. Dorothy nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then we stay. We face this together. The headlights grew brighter as Mrs. Patterson's Honda Civic pulled into the driveway behind a police cruiser, their engines cutting through the silence of the Ashfords' perfect suburban neighborhood. Time to find out if 3 years of documentation could be undone by one night of truth. Mrs. Patterson stood in the Ashfords' pristine foyer at 10:23 p.m., her tired eyes taking in every detail with newfound scrutiny. The police officer beside her, Officer Martinez, according to his name tag, had the grim expression of someone who'd seen this particular type of case before. Riley, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentler than I'd ever heard it, I need you to know that none of this is your fault. We received some very serious allegations tonight, and I should have investigated more thoroughly years ago. Richard tried one last desperate play. Mrs. Patterson, surely we can discuss this rationally. Riley's been having some adjustment issues lately, making wild accusations. Mr. Ashford, Officer Martinez interrupted, I'd recommend you stop talking until you've consulted with an attorney. Mrs. Patterson pulled out her tablet, the same one she'd used for 3 years of fake check-ins. Riley, I need you to show me your actual living space. Not the room you showed me this afternoon, but where you really sleep. The basement. My stomach clenched as I led them downstairs to the windowless concrete box I'd called home for 3 years. Mrs. Patterson's sharp intake of breath when she saw the space heater, the leaking ceiling stain, the twin bed crammed against the wall, told me everything I needed to know about how badly she'd been deceived. This is where you've been living, she asked, her professional composure cracking. Since 2021, I confirmed. They told you I chose this room for privacy, but they lock the kitchen at night and the heat barely reaches down here. Mrs. Patterson was furiously typing notes, her face flushed with what looked like anger at herself. The financial disclosures they submitted showed expenditures for bedroom furniture, educational materials, clothing allowances. $47,000 in subsidies last year, Dorothy said quietly, handing Mrs. Patterson the bank statements I'd gathered. While spending maybe $200 on Riley's actual needs. Officer Martinez examined the financial documents, whistling low. This isn't just fraud. This is systematic exploitation of a minor and theft of government funds. Rebecca stepped forward with her briefcase. Officer, we have documentation of 8 families involved in this scheme. Court-ordered family communications that were intercepted, falsified progress reports, and evidence of what amounts to forced labor. The weight of it seemed to hit Mrs. Patterson all at once. 8 families, she repeated, sinking onto my basement bed. How many kids have I failed by not seeing this? 7 kids are still in active placements, I said, sitting beside her. But now they have a chance at real families instead of fake ones. Mrs. Patterson looked up at Dorothy, who'd been standing quietly in the corner. You're the grandmother. The one they claimed was delusional. I have court-ordered visitation rights that they've been violating for 2 years, Dorothy confirmed. DNA test results, birth certificates, everything proving my relationship to Riley. Plus 23 months of documentation showing my attempts to contact her. At 11:47 p.m., Officer Martinez arrested Richard and Margaret Ashford for adoption subsidy fraud, custodial interference, and endangerment of a minor. The handcuffs looked surreal against Richard's expensive suit as they led him to the patrol car. Mrs. Patterson signed the emergency custody transfer papers at 12:18 a.m., officially placing me in Dorothy's care pending my 18th birthday in 5 days. I'm sorry, Riley, she said, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. You see it now, I told her. That's what matters. Dorothy drove me away from Maple Ridge Drive at 12:43 a.m., my real life finally beginning at 17 years and 362 days old. In the rearview mirror, I watched the Ashfords' perfect house disappear into darkness. I was going home.